Singaporeans are asking how much more of a tightening will take place in terms of the foreign worker inflow, and how will government decide when the goal of restructuring has been achieved? Will it be by looking purely at productivity gains?
First, what's our objective? Our objective is to ensure that the proportion of foreigners in our workforce does not keep going up year after year after year. We've got to keep it at a steady proportion. And we decided in 2010 to go for 1/3, to try and cap it at about 1/3 of the workforce. From year to year, you may get some bumps, especially when the construction sector is surging for infrastructural needs. You might get it going a little beyond 1/3. But over the long term, let's try and keep it at about 1/3. Now, there are sectors and industries which can't do without foreign workers. Construction is a very good example, the marine sector to some extent. Even some services industries like healthcare will need foreigners, will need foreign workers. But it's important that even in those areas where you can't find enough Singaporeans to do the jobs, we reduce reliance on manpower. The raw fact of the matter is that the sectors which are most dependent on foreigners are also the sectors with the lowest levels of productivity compared to global leaders, and which have the most scope to catch up, to upgrade, to restructure. And we have to do that because that's the only way in which local wages will go up over time on a sustained basis. And in fact, these same sectors, construction, F&B, some parts of the retail sector, are the ones with not only relatively low levels of productivity, but sectors where local wages haven't moved up enough. In fact, they've been quite stagnant at the lower end of the workforce. So we have to make this move. That's our basic objective. But it's very important how we go about this. Make sure that at the end of the process, we still have an SME sector. We must have an SME sector, not just for economic reasons, but because they are part of the lifeblood of our society. So we are providing very strong support for our SMEs during this process. They take some of the pain because of foreign worker levies and dependency ratios being tightened. But we are providing very strong support for any SME that wants to upgrade, whether it's equipment or software or training of the workers or even training of the management. And we have to find ways in which large companies can help small companies in this game.
DPM, we've seen several rounds of the tightening of the foreign worker policy. Do you see that continuing in the next few years, and when will we reach a point where we can say that it's time to stop?
Well, we don't plan to tighten further, but it depends on whether the ratio of foreigners in the workforce starts rising beyond 33%, beyond 1/3, and is rising not just for short-term cyclical reason, but rising for structural reasons. If it keeps going up, then we'll have to tighten further. If we see that productivity is still languishing, and that not enough effort is being made to reduce manpower reliance in the sectors where it is possible, then we'll have to tighten further. So we make our objectives very clear. Reduce manpower reliance and raise productivity, and keep the ratio of foreigners in the workforce to about 1/3 over the long term. And if we achieve that, we won't need to tighten further.
Why was the decision to take 1/3?
Right.
What was the percentage chosen?
This was decided as part of the Economic Strategies Committee. And we recommended 1/3 because the starting point was that we were already getting close to 1/3. We were at about 32%. And our basic position is, let's not let it rise continuously beyond that level. This excludes foreign maids. Let's not let it rise beyond that level significantly. If we can, in the very long term, reduce it below 1/3, well, so much the better. But it's extremely difficult to achieve that in the economy. In the economy we have, because our SMEs in particular are significantly dependent on foreign workers in a whole range of sectors.
On hindsight, do you think this process of restructuring should have begun earlier?
I think on hindsight it could have begun earlier. See, you have to understand what happened in the last decade. The bulk of the growth in the foreign workforce took place between 2005 and 2007. And during that period, 2005-2007, we were recovering from a very rough first half of the decade. Mm-hmm. Very rough, not in terms of GDP growth, but very rough in terms of jobs and wage growth for Singaporeans, particularly at the lower end. So a lot of the policy thinking, the policy mindset was one of creating jobs. Mm-hmm. bringing unemployment down. It was close to 5%. We wanted to bring it down, and we wanted to get a lift in wages for the average worker and the low-income worker. In fact, we achieved that. And we achieved that by allowing firms to get the labor they need in order to be able to take on orders and thereby create demand for Singaporeans as well. So there was a complementarity. When you look at the system, when you look at the economy as a whole, there was a complementarity between the foreign workers coming in and more jobs being created for Singaporeans. But there was a problem, because the ease with which labor was made available gave little incentive for firms to upgrade and improve productivity. That was the first problem. Second problem is that although jobs were being made available and unemployment was coming down, which was good for households, because in a typical household, more people were able to get some work, part-time or full-time, at the low end. But wage levels at the low end stagnated. They stagnated in the first half of the decade especially. There was some lift in the second half of the decade, but not enough. So that's a concern. If we carry on with that strategy, productivity will remain weak or stagnant, and it'll be hard to lift wages at the bottom end. So we had to shift course.
And so at what point do you say that the restructuring has succeeded and it can stop? Is there a point?
Well, we are now a upper middle income country, together with Hong Kong, to some extent Taiwan and Korea, although their income levels are a little lower. That's most Singaporeans. If you ask Singaporeans, any broad-based survey, what they'd like better jobs. They'd like their pay to go up over time, more than inflation. We are not satisfied with our current standard of living and quality of life. Making sure the average Singaporean is able to move up, a good job, paying well, and with a good work-life balance. I think that's a very important objective. And we're not near that yet. In this decade, we want to make a significant improvement, very significant improvement from productivity levels that are about 70% that of the global leaders on average. In some sectors, less than half of the global leaders. I don't think we can get to 100% in 10 years. It takes a much longer time, but we've got to get much closer.